Next up, we have a conversation which in many ways perpetuates this one. And I must say that in keeping with the courtesy that I owed Vice President Ansari, we didn't ask some of the questions that he's wonderfully capable of answering, and we will have him back sooner. I'm just going to wait before all of you sit down. We're going to have a cocktail break after this. Next up is a conversation again with somebody who's seen India at its inception, 1947, seen it at its birth, pledged itself to the values by which we agreed to live. So, as I said, that Nayantara Sahgal was there at 1947 when we pledged ourselves to live by a certain value system, and she has been part of the public life of this country for the last 70 years, an active, trenchant part of this public life. She's, of course, an author of many books, a Sahitya Academy winner, but most of all, she is that public intellectual that is constantly engaging with the issues that confront India. She, of course, hails from the Nehru family. She is Nehru's niece. But more than that, at every juncture when India has teetered on the brink of failing its value system, Nayantara has been at the foreground, articulating and fighting the good fight. As we put it, the mud fights for a fearless world. She was extremely critical of her cousin during the emergency. She was one of the people who first returned the awards when Akhlaq was killed. And now she has just written a book called When the Moon Shines by Day, which is an extremely trenchant critique of contemporary India and the kind of political landscape in which we find ourselves. In many ways, all the books that Nayantara has written has been about the making of India. In a poignant way, this is about the unmaking of India. And that's the conversation we want to have with her today, why this book is so much about what she feels is the unmaking of India, and why she has led all the resistances that she has led. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Nayantara Sahgal. Thank you, Nayantara, for joining us. And there's just one little biographical detail I'd like to share with the audience that Nayantara turned 90 this year, and I just want to say, wow. To write a book as engaged, as, emotionally, intellectually engaged, and to be as you are at 90, that's a tribute, Nayantara, and I hope all of us can be that whenever we reach our ends.
Thank you very much.
So Nayantara, as I said, in many ways, your books have always been about the making of India. It's always been very politically engaged books. This book had a sense of India that is unmaking itself. Could you, many of the audience wouldn't have read your book yet. Can you give it a nutshell about what the book is about? And what was the emotion driving your writing of this book?
Well, may I just thank you and the Algebra Club for inviting me. It's a club of ideas, and ideas are having a hard time surviving. So you're a very important club. And I'd also like to say I'm happy to be here to our Scottish friend, because Glenlivet is my favorite brand. But about this book, it's always very hard to say what a novel is about, and one doesn't even want to say what it's about. One wants it to be read. But as Shoma was saying, all my novels have come out of a political background, because politics was my material. I grew up during the struggle for freedom at a time when my parents, among millions of other Indians, were engaged in this struggle led by Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi, in fact, was a close friend of my family from the time that my mother was 17 years old. In fact, he was at my mother's wedding. My parents, after the wedding ceremony, had gone to Gandhiji. We called him Bapu. They had gone to Bapu for his blessing, and he blessed them. And then, of course, he gave them a long lecture on celibacy. So my mother, who was a young woman of 20, and she had been brought up to speak her mind, and she said, Bapu, we are not going to be celibate because we love each other. So he had to put that in his pipe and smoke it. So that was my family's association with Gandhiji, and therefore my background being political, all my novels are set against a political background. And so in a sense, they add up to being about the making of India. And as Shoma was saying, the political background has changed so dramatically in the last few years that all that is happening amounts to the unmaking of India. And so this book is about that.
So, Nayantara, just to probe the book a little bit before we move on to other topics, I just quickly share with the audience that, yes, it's set in something that seems not exactly contemporary India, but racks of it, because there's a department that we as yet don't officially have called the Department of Cultural Transformation. And the project in the book is to create a country dominated by a Hindu master race. And there's a group of a group of women that keep meeting to discuss books, because here is a time where many books are being disappeared off the shelves and they're book-burning frenzies, and many other things happen. You can buy the book outside and get it signed, as Nayantara said, please read it. But Nayantara, that's what I wanted to ask you about, that you've called this book When the Moon Shines by Day. Could you at least speak about what that meant? And this Department of Cultural Transformation, it seems something that is set in the future, but is that what we're really witnessing, and is that something that bothers you deeply, this project of cultural transformation?
It's not set in the future, it's set in the present, because these things are happening. As we speak, they are all happening. The title, the meaning of it is revealed in the course of the book, but what it means is frankly that, when people are made to agree or are forced to agree with propositions like the sun shines by night and the moon shines by day, and if they don't agree, they are jailed or killed or whatever. That's the kind of thing that happens in a dictatorship, in an authoritarian society where debate and dissent are not allowed. And the title comes out of that.
So, as you said that the book is set in contemporary times, do you feel that we are going through a period like that, where there is a silent dictatorship at play? And the question I'd like to attach to that is that you were a very trenchant critic of your cousin, Indira Gandhi, when she declared the emergency. Both are very muscular leaders, Mr. Modi and Indira Gandhi. What is the difference that you see? And are you more worried now or less worried now?
There's a major difference. In the time of the emergency under Mrs. Gandhi, we knew that we were living in a virtual dictatorship. In fact, it was not a virtual dictatorship, because when the emergency was declared, all dissent was crushed, the entire opposition was jailed, and dire consequences awaited anybody who disagreed. And ultimately, the Constitution itself was amended so that we didn't even have the right to life or liberty. So it was a clear situation, and everybody knew what it was. Today, all those things are happening under the guise of democracy. And that is what makes today a much more dangerous situation. Debate doesn't exist anymore. Even on the TV channels, I call some of them the chamcha channels, because they are conveying the government's views by shouting and screaming. There's no real debate. A few honorable exceptions are there. And similarly, what can I say? You all know there have been lynch killings, mob killings, and not only of writers, but I'm sorry, but it's something that really upsets me, of innocent Indians carrying out their normal jobs. These are becoming routine, either gunshot killings or by whatever ugly killing instruments can be found. And they take place publicly on high roads in the sight of the police. And that's not the end of it. There's something gone very wrong with our justice system. There's an insane travesty of justice when the killers are let off scot-free and the victims or their families are called the guilty party. So it's a very much worse situation. Thank you.
So, you know, Nayantara, there is, while there is this creeping sense of dismay, distress, certainly the sense of dissent being crushed, I was interested that in your book you have a layer of a character who constantly reminds of what the German and the Nazi experience was. Most Indians bristle when you make this parallel or this comparison or evoke the idea of fascist Germany in the context of India. Do you think that that really this country can never go that far? Is that an exaggerated fear? But since it's part of your book, is it a justified fear? Do you think that that is something we must keep in our minds?
You mean, is it a justified comparison?
Yes.
Well, it's not a fiction, it's a fact, because there was no RSS in the 1920s. It was the Hindu Mahasabha, which was the ancestor of the RSS. But the leaders of that made actual contact with Mussolini. I'm not sure if Hitler was on the rise quite then. Mussolini was. One of them met Mussolini in Italy. They were great admirers of the dictators because the Hindu Mahasabha felt that Mahatma Gandhi had emasculated India with his nonviolence, that Indians must become militant, and become killers in their own right. And he consulted Mussolini about all that. Mussolini told him to train children to kill, or at least to become familiar with weapons. And all of that started then. And so there was an actual connection. And that's why I felt I could bring it into the story, not the Italian side, but the German side. Yeah.
But so are you as despairing of India today as to evoke that comparison with Nazi Germany? So when one is speaking of concern for India, that's one thing. Are you really despairing of the political climate that much today that you would invoke the German comparison?
Am I despairing of India? Yeah. This is a country, what can I say? Hamid Sahab has talked a lot about it very eloquently. But here's a country which at independence, a country of deeply religious people, of different religions, who declared themselves a secular republic. You know, and with an atheist or an agnostic prime minister. And it was an incredible situation. They were given universal suffrage. It had never happened in history before that an impoverished, undeveloped country gave its people universal suffrage. Gender equality was declared in the Constitution, as Hamid Sahab has said, and so on. This is a great society which gave unto itself this heritage. How can I despair of it? I have to say, I am despairing in the short term because of the mob lynchings, killings, and other terrible things which are taking place, and the way that justice is being denied. That is something to despair of, but in the long term, we are going to combat all this, and we are going to stick to our secular background and prove ourselves great, not as militant nationalists, which is the mood today, not that way, but great because we will bring the 30 million people who are below the poverty line, bring them up through welfare, through more spending on the things we should spend on, not bullet trains, but health and education.
So, Nayantara, earlier, just one more aspect of the book before we quickly move on. There's one quote in the book where one of the characters is penalized for being an anti-war pacifist, you know, and the quote is that today to be anti-war is blasphemy. It's not just non-kosher, but it's blasphemy. Where did, could you elaborate on that emotion as well?
Difficult to elaborate on that. Again, it's about the political atmosphere today, which seems to be the end of Brahmanism. It's the rise of the Kshatriya. After all, our great epics are all about war. What are they about? The Ramayana is about war. The Mahabharata is about war. And I think today the whole emphasis is again to eliminate any notion of nonviolence. Gandhi, therefore, was an unfortunate episode. He has to be wiped out. Nehru has already been wiped out. Gandhi has to be wiped out. Godse is the hero. And there's this, I see that the armed forces, which is our great neutral tradition, which never had anything to do with politics, I see now they are shown on TV. They take part in political debates. They appear more and more on panel discussions. This didn't happen before. So there's a kind of worship of armaments, arms, war. That kind of atmosphere prevails. So I brought that into the book.
So Nayantara, it's a question I asked Hamid Saab earlier. You've just said that Gandhi is in the process, or at least his ideas, even as he's enshrined more flamboyantly, and many people visit his ashram, but his ideas are being wiped out. Nehru has pretty much, his ideas are obliterated or reviled. It's a question I asked Hamid Saab, and we didn't have enough time to probe it, and I ask you again, that in what ways has the previous generations, intellectuals, including, yourself and others on that spectrum, what are the mistakes that have been made that have devalued this value system so much for it to be rejected, or at least sidelined now the way it has been sidelined?
I didn't get the sort of crux of the...
The crux is that today, the fact that all these grand values are contested, or that they are reviled, or indeed, if we accept that this is a government or the RSS is a cultural, a political body that does not believe in the value system of liberal, secular, plural India, if one accepts that as a premise. My question is, why have they been voted so resoundingly into power? In what ways was the ideas of secularism and pluralism let down by previous governments and previous intellectuals?
No, I don't think this government coming into power has anything to do with secularism being let down. On the contrary, I think it is the success of secularism that has forced this government to show its hand in the, for example, in the 2002 killings in Gujarat. They showed their hand because of the success of secularism. They had to show that that's not what we want. This is what we want. And they made their point in Gujarat.
Sorry, I'm not very clear about what you meant by that. What do you mean that it was the success of secularism that 2002 riots would happen? Could you clarify that?
Yes. Riots took place in Gujarat. Let's call a spade a spade. Those riots were state-sponsored. There's no two ways about that. And there are cases still going on, and there are human rights people defending the victims of those riots. And we think that, they were a great mistake and that should never have happened. But for the ruling party, it was a definitive movement and a great success which defined what they meant. And therefore, they acquired, through those riots, a huge majority of people that believed, as they did, in Hindutva. There are leaders that bring out the best in their people, and there are leaders that bring out the worst in their people. There are two kinds of leadership. And the Gujarat leadership brought out the worst instincts in a large number of Hindus who believed in Hindutva, and assured a vote base, a huge vote bank that did not need to rely any longer on Muslim votes or Dalit votes. They were secure because they had a large number of Hindus.
But Nayantara, normally these television debates devolve into this endless whataboutery between 1984 and 2002. If I'm ever brought into that position, I think I make a very valid point, which is that we were not journalists in 1984, and journalists of that time should be held accountable for whether they raised those issues or not. In our time, there's been several large riots, Gujarat being the worst, Muzaffarnagar, and it is for us to speak up about that. But, when one speaks about communalism, you were there in 1984 and you've lived through 2002, you returned your awards, in protest, and there were people who raised that issue about, again, this liberal elite, that why did one not make as much of a song and dance about 84 as one has done in 2002? Rajiv Gandhi in his lifetime never apologized for 84, never apologized for that statement about when a tree falls, the earth shakes. Have we held the Congress less to account than we hold the BJP? Have we held the Congress? Have we been less harsh on the Congress and all its failures than one is harsh on the BJP?
Well, no. Let me put it this way. This is constantly brought up to us writers. When we returned our awards, we were attacked. Where were you in 1984? Why didn't you protest? And one had to say that one did protest. I, for example, at that time, was the vice president of the PUCL. Ours was not the first, but the second organization. The first was the PUDR, People's Union for Democratic Rights. Ours, the People's Union for Civil Liberties, was the second to do a complete report on the 1984 riots, naming names. So there was no question of not doing anything. Many people did much. And similarly, during the emergency, I was heart and soul against it, spoke and wrote against it. And there were many like me. So I don't think we can say that we didn't hold X or Y to account earlier. We did. One ridiculous part of the attack on writers of not holding people to account, they were screaming at a group of people, "Why didn't you hold the emergency to account?" So this man answered, "Because I wasn't born." You know, so it has all been quite ridiculously disproportionate. But the fact is that if Christians were thrown to the lions back in Roman times, should we be throwing them to the lions today?
Yes.
You know,
Absolutely.
something has happened that was wrong, that was barbaric. Is it all right to repeat it today? It's not. So what happens today is what concerns us, because it's happening now. What has happened in the past, it was wrong, it was bad, it's over. But what's happening today is still happening.
So Nayantara, you know, as when we were discussing this conversation, and I told you that, in a sense, one is part of the same mindset. So I don't want this to be a conversation where we are just in constant consonance. I think that there is a criticism that does make me introspect, at least, that how did the word liberal elite become something, again, that creates scorn, you know? And I would really ask you to reflect that did we, or did you, or did others, whoever this liberal elite is, did one make mistakes? You know, so let me make it very specific. In the book, in your book, there is a reference to one of the books that the book club discusses, which is about a woman wanting sexual satisfaction, wanting an orgasm, and she goes around acquiring many lovers and many sexual experiences. And so there is that whole idea of sexual emancipation. There are other references in the book about liberalism, you know, reasserting one's fealty towards liberalism. But the cultural references are extremely cosmopolitan, you know, and they range from across different continents, different countries, Western references to artists and all of that. When people reject the idea of a liberal elite, do you think it was too westernized? Do you think it was too elite? Should liberalism have drawn its idiom and its metaphors from more local contexts? For instance, if today I had to speak to, say, my driver about the value of allowing differing views, and I said, I defend to my death your right to disagree, and oh, this is what Voltaire said, it's going to make no sense to him, you know? Shouldn't one be drawing these ideas of liberalism from within Hinduism or Islam or something which makes sense, which masses can access? So, long story short, has liberal elites made a mistake in the way they articulate liberalism? And has it been too elitist a project?
Well, you know, the first time that the elite and the mass combined was under Gandhi, under his movement, which, and it had never happened before in history in any country, this unity of the mass with the elite, except in India. And Gandhi did it by that movement which cut across region, religion, language, gender, everything, and therefore created India as one unity, which is how we emerged at independence. Now, your question, Shoma, I would say that there has been a great deal of communication between what you call the elite and the mass. It happens in a variety of ways at many different levels. One level is through political activism, which is happening every day through people like, say, Tista Setalvad and many others. There's environmental activism, like Medha Patkar, which is concerned with the mass of the people and their problems. It has happened through writing, through the regional languages, through a great communicator like Mahashweta Devi in Hindi, then others like recently Perumal Murugan, and any number of other regional writers. So communication is something which is happening all the time at different levels of society. I don't think that there's been any failure. There may have been, and there still is maybe a gap between, say, the party-going Indian, you know, who's not concerned at all with anything but making money, but all Indians are not in that category. So I don't despair of a lack of communication.
One last question before we move on is this whole idea of freedom of expression and debate, Nayantara. You returned your award, and it really triggered a very much needed pushback on crushing of artistic freedom as well as, liberal values. But the other thing that has become very difficult is that a university like JNU stopped Baba Ramdev from coming to the campus. So where do you stand on this whole idea of the liberals quite often being intolerant of somebody whose views don't sit with them, So what do you think about men like Baba Ramdev or indeed any others that one doesn't agree with? Yogi Adityanath, for instance. Should he be allowed into a campus to speak? And should it be a war of ideas? Or should one really exclude them the way liberal communities have done?
Well, of course, debate is essential to democracy, but debate means that the person that you are asking also believes in debate. And if this Baba didn't believe in debate, you can understand that the young are very angry. And it is right that they should be angry over a situation like this. Personally, I would have let him come and I would have said, sit down. If you have a better idea of mine, convince me. That's the way to deal in a democracy. But it is true that university students and young people do feel strongly, and I can understand their anger.
Thank you. I'm going to take some questions from the audience before, if there's time, we'll ask a couple more. So this is Rotash Mal, who's saying, are we looking at Huxley, Orwell's 1984 Brave New World playing out? What would be needed to ensure that 1919 is not our last free election? There is no counterforce to this steamroller. And is this an alarmist position, or are these real worries?
Well, of course, there is already a huge amount of dissent and opposition to what's happening today from a large number of groups. Scientists, historians, writers, students, women, Dalits above all, who have said, we're not going to lift cow carcasses anymore. I mean, these are major uprisings that are taking place. So there is all that discontent, which will show up ultimately. What we do need is a united opposition of some kind. United, that is, of course, they have their internal disagreements, but united in the sense that they oppose the things that are going on today, and they oppose the institution of a Hindu Rashtra, And we do need that. So number one, we need a united opposition politically. But number two, what we need is the assurance that the machines are not tampered with. Because in the UP election, there was considerable fraud. It was very important for the ruling party to win the UP, because the UP has the biggest number of votes in parliament, and they need the numbers in order to be able to change the constitution and declare a Hindu Rashtra. So these are the two things which we must have by 2019. The political opposition united and assurance that the election will be fair.
So, Nayantara, this is a question that it would be very interesting to hear your views on. Is that an insistent bell or or an ending bell? So, Yadav Mehra wants to ask you for your views on Rahul Gandhi as a leader.
My views about him as a leader? Well, what can I say? He himself didn't want to be a leader for a long time and said so. Now he has said that he wants to be a leader, and if that is so, I wish him all success, because we need to have an opposition that gets together, and it's so important that if he's now willing to be a leader, good for him.
Nayantara, isn't that awful vanity? Isn't that a vanity that is not allowed to any other political figures in this country? That you should sometimes want to be a leader, then you don't want to be a leader, and whether you want to or you don't want to, the seat is always kept hot for you. Is that a presumption for... Is that an unacceptable presumption for any leader in a 21st century democracy to have? For a man like Rahul Gandhi to presume that the top post in his party will be kept warm for him regardless of whether he wants to be a leader or doesn't want to be a leader. And as he vacillates, that top position will still be kept for him. Is that an acceptable presumption?
Well, you know, it's no good putting that question to me. I have been opposing dynasty for decades. Since in Indira Gandhi's time, when she put forward Sanjay, I wrote about it at that time. That book is going to be republished now. It's called Tryst with Power. So, I mean, I certainly don't believe in dynasty, never have. And I don't believe in it in any part of India or Asia. And the whole of India and Asia is inundated with dynasty. I don't think it's a healthy sign for democracy. So whether it's Rahul or anybody else, I don't believe that per se it is healthy. It is true that Rajiv Gandhi was pushed into the job, but he got the biggest majority until that time in the coming election. So when that happens, it's not purely dynasty. He won that on merit. So there's also that part of it to consider.
Well, he also won it on a sympathy vote, but there isn't that much. You know, this is a good question from Priya, because I think Nehru really is someone we should talk about. She asked that, do you think the India of 1947 and the secular values we adopted was driven by the high idealism of Nehru, among others, and that the real communal sentiments of the society are now coming to the fore because the majority of people today have no sense of history and hence of that idealism of 1947?
Well, yes, and I think our education is responsible for the fact that the emphasis on commerce and on technology, and I don't think our education or our young people are getting enough in the way of history, literature, philosophy, all the humanities. That's a big loss.
And of course, we haven't had time to speak of how the history textbooks are changing, that we've now made Akbar one line in a textbook. And
also, you must remember that Maharana Pratap Singh won the Battle of Haldighati, not Akbar.
Yeah. Well, this is a good light note to end on. This is a test of whether you're a true Democrat or not, Nayantara. Suresh wants to ask why neither Hamid Saab nor you have acknowledged that it's the Prime Minister's birthday today. And so are you going to wish him happy birthday? That today is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's birthday. Would you like to wish him a happy birthday?
Well, it's a very happy day for me because it's my daughter's birthday.
And just a one-line answer to this question, Nayantara, that, you know, Dabholkar's son and daughter, who will be coming to the club very soon, was talking about why those cases have still not come to this logical conclusion in Congress-led governments. And they made this point that the Congress has a pragmatic communalism and the BJP has a programmatic communalism. Would you accept that that's a fair criticism?
I wouldn't accept that because the Congress has no communalism as a policy at all. The whole point is that a secular society is one that it is there because we have so many religions. And therefore we can't give all the benefits of society to one religion. The whole point is that's the Congress platform. Now they may have failed to accomplish that many times, but that is their platform. The other platform is just the reverse, that only the Hindu is the true citizen of India, and the others are, the Christians and Sikhs are guests, and the Muslims are enemies.
Thank you, Nayantara. We've run out of time. Both these conversations could have gone on much more as we probed the ideas of India, which we pledged to ourselves in 1947 and where we find ourselves in 2017. But the common thread in both what Hamid Saab said and what you said is that to keep faith with our society, even as we criticize our governments. And that faith is borne out again and again through the ages and definitely through contemporary India. And that we don't need to rethink our value systems at all, maybe just the way we practice it. So thank you very, very much. Nayantara's book is outside and she will be signing it. And then we'll be back very soon for another animated conversation. Thank you very much, Nayantara.
Thank you, Shoma.